This special episode of the Calimesa Insider Podcast takes us into one of the most important infrastructure projects in Calimesa, the long-awaited reconstruction of the Cherry Valley Boulevard Interchange. If you've sat in traffic there or adjusted your entire schedule around it, you know exactly why this project matters. In this episode, we will walk through how we got here, what the diverging diamond design will look like, what construction will mean for day-to-day travel, and how the city is working to secure the funding needed to finally build this interchange. We will also address many of the questions residents have submitted ahead of time, ranging from access to Singleton, to Roberts Road, to the broader regional traffic challenges we're all feeling. There's a lot to cover, so let's get right into it.
Welcome to the Calimesa Insider Podcast, the official podcast of the City of Calimesa. Join City Manager Will Kolbow as he takes you behind the scenes of city projects, community stories, and the future of our hometown. Stay informed, stay connected. This is the Calimesa Insider Podcast.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special live edition of the Calimesa Insider Podcast. My name is Will Kolbow. I'm the city manager of the city of the Calimesa. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, am I in the right place? I was looking for the Cherry Valley Boulevard Interchange Town Hall. Don't worry, you are indeed in the right place. Calimesa Insider is the City of Calimesa's bi-weekly podcast that we have been doing since May of 2023. This is episode number 63. During tonight's presentation, you may hear references to various podcast episodes that cover some of the questions we have received in depth. A recording of tonight's meeting will be available tomorrow following our normal cadence of releasing episodes, which is every other Friday. And I will include links to all of the episodes that are referenced in tonight's show in the show description. Now, before we get to our presentation, a few housekeeping items. We've had almost 90 people register for tonight's town hall, and we do have people joining us both on Microsoft Teams through the link that was sent to you when you registered for this event, as well as on the Calimesa Insider YouTube channel. As a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, you won't be able to ask questions directly. So if you want to ask questions, there is a link in the description of the YouTube live event to register. And once you register, you'll get that link and you can switch over to the Teams feed. We have reviewed all of the questions and comments that were submitted when folks registered. A lot of the people had similar questions, so we did do our best to integrate answering those questions into the presentation. For those on Teams, if you have questions that have not been answered, there are going to be two ways you can ask those questions. First, if you're watching on a tablet or desktop, you can click on the Q&A button or tab at the top and submit your question. You won't see it pop up initially. We're collecting the questions in a queue, and we will review those questions when we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation. If you're watching on a cell phone, the only way to ask a question will be to raise your hand. To do that, tap the three dots at the bottom of the screen, then tap the hand icon in the upper right pop-up. If your question is answered and you don't want to be called upon, simply repeat that process to put your hand down. We're going to answer questions submitted through the Q&A first, then we will get to those that have their hand raised. Please keep in mind that although we understand there is a lot of frustration with the current state of the interchange, please keep your interactions to questions and not rants or anything like that, because we do understand the frustration and it's justified. But we're trying to focus on the solutions that we're going to have going forward. Lastly, if you're new to hearing about Calimesa's podcast, I encourage you to visit calimesa.gov/podcast, where you will find links to the podcast's social media accounts, as well as the video and audio versions of the podcast. Often I will see comments on social media about city issues that have been covered on the podcast in detail. And a lot of times, although this is a Calimesa podcast, it can answer some common misconceptions about how large infrastructure projects work, things that are happening in the city, along with things like economic development. I do see a lot of misinformation out there, so I highly recommend subscribing if you want to learn the real story rather than confident, but often wrong speculation that we see on social media, especially on Facebook groups. Again, that's calimesa.gov/podcast. Now, I want to briefly introduce our panelists. Mike Thornton has been the city engineer for Calimesa since 2012. Calimesa is a small and lean organization, so we don't have a full-time engineering department consisting of employees. Many small cities like us outsource functions such as engineering. As such, Mike is not a city employee, but we do contract with this firm, TKE Engineering, and he serves the role of city engineer. Brandon Reyes is the Vice President of Transportation for M&S Engineers, and he is serving as project manager for the interchange. So both Mike and Brandon have been involved with this project since the very beginning, going back all the way to 2017. Yes, you heard that right. The ultimate improvements, which you see a concept for on the screen, have been in the works since 2017, and that doesn't even count the traffic signals, which was a separate project. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of you that we've been working on it this long. So in that vein, I want to start with Mike. Tell us a little bit about what we have done so far.
Let me start with just a little bit of history with the Cherry Valley Interchange. Cherry Valley Interchange was built in the 1960s. It is changed ever so slightly with a recent addition of traffic signals at the on and off ramps, and those were driven by a development in the county. When we started work on this, that work had not been done, and we were looking at improving the interchange basically since the 1960s. The first step in the process, and in order to be able to do an interchange improvement on the state highway system, is we have to go through a process with Caltrans to get permission to build improvements. The first step in the process was called a project study report. We started that in 2017, and that work was completed, I'm going to say, about mid-2018. From there, we went on to what's called project approval and environmental document. That process took, I think, close to 5 years. Brandon can correct me if I'm wrong, but it took about 5 years to get through that process and get our environmental document approved by Caltrans. Our environmental document covered both CEQA, which is a state requirement environmental document, and NEPA, which is a federal environmental review. Post PA and ED, we began to do design. It's called plan specifications and estimates. We've been working on that for about a year and a half. And in doing so, we are approaching 90% complete. Upon approval of the plan specifications and estimate, we will go on to right-of-way acquisition in order to be able to construct the improvements that you see on the screen.
So you mentioned the traffic signals, and I think that we did get some questions about those, and I think there's some varying opinions about how effective they've been. But one thing I want to reemphasize that you mentioned is that it was a requirement of the county for the warehouses. So I want to make that clear. There's a lot of speculation about who approved those warehouses, where they're located. The warehouses are in the county, the unincorporated county, not in the city of Calimesa. So they were not approved by the Calimesa City Council. They were approved and conditioned by the County Board of Supervisors. And so one of the conditions that was imposed was to install the traffic signal. Now, Mike, talk a little bit about some of the frustrations that we even faced as a city due to our involvement, or maybe more accurately, lack thereof.
Our major frustrations have occurred with the processing of our project with Caltrans. Many times we have prepared documents, submitted them for review, and then had to readdress a number of comments that Caltrans would provide to us. Those comments also create delays. So one of the major frustrations that we've experienced with Caltrans is, well, now you have to update the traffic data, for example, because it's old. Well, the reason the traffic data is old is because processing with Caltrans created a lot of delays in the project. So processing with Caltrans is very challenging, time consuming, and at times frustrating.
And I think that the at least the local people that we work with, they're just trying to do their job, right? I mean, they have certain procedures that they are required to follow. So I think that sometimes it's not necessarily things that they have in their control and they're trying to check all the boxes that they're required to check. But I guess my question was more about the traffic signals themselves, because that was, again, processed by the developer of the warehouses. And so the city wasn't really involved with that. So, for example, people have expressed frustration over the lack of a right turn lane going eastbound on Cherry Valley Boulevard onto the freeway when those signals were put in. So talk about what our involvement with that part is, and that's what I meant, like basically lack thereof, because we really weren't truly involved with that part of the project.
You are correct. The city was not consulted with the design as it was being processed with Caltrans and the developer in accordance with or also the county. We were not even consulted until the project was ready to go to construction. We did not have an opportunity as city staff to say, hey, could we add a dedicated right lane on-ramp for eastbound I-10? We did not have the opportunity to do that.
Right. And I think part of that was because, obviously the developer of the warehouse, they're going to focus on what their needs are and not necessarily on the far side of the interchange, right? I mean, they just weren't thinking about that. They're just only thinking about the turn movements that they're required to make. So, turning radiuses and things like that. So Caltrans has certain requirements for intersections near freeways. And obviously the current alignment of Calimesa Boulevard doesn't meet today's standards. So as part of this project, we will need to move Calimesa Boulevard, the intersection with Calimesa Boulevard and Cherry Valley Boulevard, farther away from the intersection or from the interchange. Tell us a little bit about that part of the project.
Caltrans standards require an adjacent intersection to be a minimum of 400 feet away from the interchange. As you said, well, Calimesa Boulevard is basically immediately adjacent to the freeway. That said, we have decided to phase the interchange project, where we will realign Calimesa Boulevard away from the interchange prior to interchange construction. That project right now is in I'll call it a design and environmental review phase right now. We are preparing an environmental document to clear the project for construction. We are also doing precise design of the roadway alignment, and that would be followed by right-of-way acquisition. We anticipate that the roadway would be constructed probably mid-26, and that will be done ahead of the interchange. Brandon later will explain when the interchange construction will start, but that will be done ahead of the interchange construction and completed.
So I guess another follow-up to that, the funding for that, particular part of the project, because we are basically taking that on as a city CIP project, is fully funded, correct?
Yes.
So just for those that are watching and are interested in the details, so Mike talked about the various steps that are involved in a major interchange reconstruction project. I actually I did a podcast episode where I covered that in detail. So if you're interested in that, because, whether you're concerned about this interchange or Oak Valley Parkway to this, which is the next interchange up in Beaumont or Highland Springs, they all have to go through these same processes, and they're actually in processes before. So they're both in the PA and ED phase that Mike referred to earlier. You can check out episode 49 of the Calimesa Insider Podcast, which will have that information. So there's been, obviously, because there's been a lot of time elapsed and there's actually a lot of work that goes into what Mike described. And so, a lot of things to consider and think about when you're designing a piece of infrastructure of this magnitude. So far, this may be a bit surprising, but we've spent already about $6.2 million on planning for this project, which in the infrastructure world is about right for a $70 million piece of infrastructure. So usually about 10% of the construction cost is what you anticipate for planning, design, environmental work, engineering. So we're right in that range. And almost all of this money has come from current and former developers of Summerwind Ranch, which is the development in Calimesa. In addition, we have other funds that have been secured, including $2.1 million from a 2017 settlement between the Western Riverside Council of Governments and the City of Beaumont regarding non-payment of fees to the TUMF program. Now, this $2.1 million was a small piece of that overall settlement. $1,072,000 came from the Cherry Valley Boulevard warehouse developers as part of their conditions of approval by the county. And this is in addition to the traffic signals they were obligated to install, which obviously they have. $772,000 of that will be used for the interchange directly, and $350,000 will be used for the realignment of Calimesa Boulevard at Cherry Valley Boulevard, because obviously the need for that realignment arises because of the interchange. We've also secured $500,000 from a congestion mitigation and air quality or CMAQ federal grant, and $2 million in community project funding, which was secured on behalf of the city by Congressman Ken Calvert. So in total, we have about $5.4 million in funding already secured, in addition to what has already been spent by the developers on this project so far. But as I mentioned earlier, this is a $70 million project, so there's a bit of a gap there, right? So we will discuss our strategy to secure the rest of the money later in the presentation. So now let's talk about where we currently are. So for this one, I want to turn to Brandon. First of all, just briefly describe for us, Brandon, what the plan specification and estimates, or PS&E phase, is, and what has been done so far, and what is left.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Will. Okay, so plan specifications and estimates. This is a phase in nearly every construction project that happens before a job goes to construction. And in that name, you have your plans that are going to go to build and go to bid. You have your specifications, which kind of helps guide the contractor on how to build it. And then your estimate, which is important for planning purposes for a city like Calimesa to understand, what kind of money they need to get for a project like this. And Will did mention that $70 million tag, that for a job like this, which is not uncommon for an interchange of this magnitude, that type of dollar amount. So we are in, and Mike mentioned it, the 90 to 95% step with Caltrans, which is a great thing. While there is still 5 to 10% left, that can be a heavy lift in working through with Caltrans and the city to make sure we have crossed every T and dotted every I and make sure this thing is ready to go out to bid. So our team has developed very much beyond what's seen here, which is really a graphical representation. The plans do not look as elegant as this, as they're, black and white pieces of paper with a lot of sheets. But that package has come together great. We're working with Caltrans right now, and we should, on and off throughout the last few years. And we should be submitting a package of a 95% formal package then in the coming month or two. And then after that, you receive feedback from them. And of course, the city of Calimesa, any others involved that need to review these plans, give us feedback, and then we get it to 100%. And then at 100%, there's still a step of kind of making sure, again, everyone's excited and ready for it. Make sure it's ready to be biddable and buildable is a term we use a lot. And then from there, assuming the funding strategy comes together, which I know we're covering later, then you put it out to bid so you can get some contractors to look at it. And yeah, there's a lot of activity in the area that I'm sure many have seen or used to. A lot of contractors building a lot of work in the Inland Empire and specifically Riverside County, which is great for all of us as taxpayers, that it's a very active time right now to build, which is a good competitive market. So yeah, I think that explains it well with respect to the step we're in.
Okay. So one thing that can drive the cost of infrastructure is the need for land. So one of the things that I think that we have an advantage here is that maybe, the way we're designing it, I think there was a question that had some, or maybe it was a comment that had some concerns about, well, this seems like it would be way too big for us, and I don't see how they're going to fit it in this space. But amazingly, you're going to actually add capacity and we'll talk about the design that was chosen specifically in a moment, but talk about the right-of-way needs for this particular project.
Yeah, and Mike might be able to pile on with specifics on right-of-way if that's needed. But, look, with an interchange, the reason like this on a state highway, the reason you have Caltrans involved is because they own the right-of-way to a certain boundary, usually designated by a fence that you can see out there in real life. And so Caltrans is a big player of an owner of the piece of right-of-way. And so the city works with Caltrans, which is why they're involved, to get an approval of an improvement like this. And, that kind of right-of-way cost is not, there's not a cost attached to that. It's just Caltrans making sure that the roadway that's going through their facility meets their, I'll say, standards, expectations, and any future work they want to do. There are a few parcels around the interchange along Cherry Valley that are privately held. And so there are a few privately held parcels that will be impacted. A lot of it is minor widening of the roadway, if you will, that's going to impact those properties. And some of that information can be found in an environmental document more formally. Currently, we are in the current phase we're in does allow the city to begin right-of-way activity formally with those owners. And Calimesa Boulevard does play a role in that. But as Mike mentioned, that project is being done separately. So Mike, I don't know if you want to tag on anything related to right-of-way. That's about as far as I go.
So I guess I would tag on by saying, when we started the project in that first step that we described earlier, which is called the project study report, Brandon and his team developed 3 different alternatives. And the diverging diamond alternative was the least right-of-way impactful alternative, which was part of the reason it was selected to reduce the impacts to adjacent properties. Well, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. So, we're speaking of that design. We've had several questions because I think this is a relatively new design concept, but we're starting to see it more and more. And I think, Brandon, you're going to talk about that a little bit. But we've seen questions, concerns about the design. We do have a video queued up here, so I'm gonna show that in a moment here. But I would like Brandon to kind of walk us through diverging diamond interchange, excuse me. So I will go ahead and start that video now, and you can describe what we're seeing, Brandon.
Yeah. So what we have here is a virtual video at this location. It was done a few years back. So, a couple hills, for instance, we know have been changed. So right now we're heading eastbound, we call it here, on along Cherry Valley Boulevard. And I'm going to kind of drop into the car here. To the right is Stater Brothers, by the way, if you're trying to get oriented. And we're going to drive through the intersection. Now, don't worry. When we get back to plan view, I'll explain some more. This does go a little fast. We're driving through the intersection, and as you see, we cross to the other side of the road, and then we cross back. And I'll explain that, how that works. This does go a little fast, so I want to be able to give people the time to understand that. Now we're heading westbound, and then we're going to get into the car. Again, this moves quickly, but you can see kind of generally how this is going to work. And in this car we're in or about to get in, we're heading westbound along Cherry Valley, and then we're crossing the intersection to get on the other side, and I will explain that, don't worry, of the road, and then we cross back to get back to the other side. Now, for those of you that are familiar with this, that might have had questions, I totally understand, we totally understand, and I will kind of frame what we're thinking here. So I did do a little Googling here. Every once in a while I do this for something like this. If you go to an example, and I'm sure there's other examples, this is not a website that my company or the city is involved with, but it's just called divergingdiamond.com. I cannot tell you, I promise that it's exactly right. I'm not sure when they last updated it. We could probably email them or something, but it does show you on, I think, the front page, a list of 99 DDIs that have opened in the United States. And so this is not new, albeit it is new to us locally. And in California, there is one DDI open to date that Caltrans fully reviewed and approved. It's up in the Manteca area off the, I think it's SR 120, that you could go drive if you got a reason to be up in that way, in that area. There's also several in Nevada, Arizona, and our adjacent states. And why California only has one built so far? Well, different agencies have different views of things like this. And the state of California has Caltrans on their freeways, and Caltrans, I'll say, got into this once they saw other states doing it and they liked it. So what a diverging diamond does, before we flip to the next page, simply speaking, is it crosses you to the other side of the road. In many ways, I explain that as like you're driving in England. And for some, that does sound like a wild concept. But I promise you, it's not because we think we want to do something different or fun. The reason we cross to the other side of the road, well, you can go to the next slide, one of the reasons has to do with conflict points. So I'll try not to get too deep in the weeds. It's hard because I don't have a crowd I can see if I'm putting you all to sleep or anything. But on a traditional conventional diamond interchange, which you see on the left, which is what you have today, I realize that it looks like two bridges or something, but this is really what you guys have out there today. Very common in California. 50, 60, 70% of interchanges are like this. What it does is it has a lot of turning movements. And in those turning movements, you have, in what it's calling here is crossing and merging movements. We call these conflict points. And so conflict points, pink being when cars merge together, green in this case being when cars cross each other. Of course, these are all done in safe ways, but conflict points create resistance at interchanges or intersections. And these conflict points can do two things. It can increase the potential for collisions, and it can reduce what many call level of service capacity. I'll just simply call it traffic. Sorry, it can increase traffic because you got to wait for these turns before you can make your move. So what was come up with eons ago here, as we can see there are 99 in the United States, was what is this diverging diamond concept. This concept, it is has been proven, it reduces those conflicts greatly. And so that achieves an improved safety setting compared to the diamond interchange, as well as and in this case, an improved traffic scenario. A lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of people get on and off the freeway for this interchange, more so than, let's say, through movements. I'll say when you compare. Some interchanges are, a lot of people travel through the city on them. Some interchanges, more people travel to and from the freeway on them. This is that example of to and from the freeway. And so we have a lot of left turns. So what the diverging diamond does is it very simply, by putting you on the other side of the road through the interchange, your lefts act like rights. So you're not going left at a signal. You're going left like you would be doing a right turn where you yield right or yield left. This type of interchange basically creates that scenario. And so while it is complex in nature because of, we're so not used to it, it has been proven across the United States and in the state of California to work really well. Notably, there's one in construction right now in the city of San Bernardino with a different agency and a different city, obviously, that's in construction that's building a diverging diameter DDI. And it's at the it's the I-215 in University. You can go see it in construction now, and I believe it opens next year. That one's an undercrossing. It goes under a little simpler of a design and situation, not as big of a build, but it's very similar in nature. So when it's done, we all have the option to drive it, which would be kind of fun. So Will, I think I kind of covered everything, but yes. Maybe you have some follow-up, or maybe there's some clarity that's needed. Let me know.
No, those are the I think the major points we wanted to touch upon with this particular this particular design. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Now we're going to move over to construction, and I'm going to start with Mike on this one because there are several moving pieces with this. We have received many questions about access to Singleton and the missing ramps there. So let's start with that. What is the status of the Singleton Road missing westbound on-ramp and eastbound off-ramp?
Similar to the Cherry Valley interchange, we have decided to phase the construction of improvements at Singleton. I want to remind the group that, as I said earlier, Calimesa Boulevard needs to be a minimum of 400 feet away from the interchange. The city has designed a realignment of Calimesa Boulevard at Singleton, and we are now in the process of acquiring right-of-way to be able to construct those improvements. That portion of the project, is fully funded by WRCOG and through what's referred to as the TUNC program. Once the right-of-way is acquired, we will finish the design and have the project out to bid. We anticipate the construction will begin on realignment of Calimesa Boulevard about mid-26. The second phase of this is to actually construct the missing ramps. The process that we described earlier for the Cherry Valley interchange also applies to the Singleton interchange. We have to process applications with Caltrans in order to be able to construct the missing ramps. Just some highlights of what is included in the Caltrans processing includes an environmental document review. And we talked about, it took us 5 years to get one done on Cherry Valley. We are also working on a similar document for Singleton. We are not complete with it yet, and we have been working on it for about 3 years. Secondly, we had to do a lot of traffic analysis. What Caltrans requires the city to demonstrate is if we add the missing ramps, that there will be a 20-year acceptable level of service related to traffic at the improved interchange. Some of the other components that we are processing with Caltrans include stormwater management and drainage, and of course, design, and typically it will be right-of-way acquisition, but for the Singleton interchange and installing the missing ramps, we do not anticipate any right-of-way acquisition will be necessary. So, Will, I will throw it back to you.
Okay. So, we've also had several, so one of that Calimesa Boulevard is one of the connections to Singleton, but also Roberts Road used to connect there. And so there's been questions about when that will connect again. So I'm going to briefly touch upon that one. I'm going to turn it over to Mike for some questions on it. But, and this will also answer the question we got about what is happening at the Oak Valley Town Center, where there's, warehouses supposed to be going up there and in the retail center and things like that. The brief explanation is there are tons of legal messes with this project. And I did cover this in detail on the podcast, so I'm not going to regurgitate it here. But episode 7, 28, 45, and 56 all talked about this. So if you want to know all these gory details, that's where you can find it. But the biggest issue for Roberts Road is that the retail developer who went bankrupt was responsible for building all the new roads through that section. And so typically when a developer is building new infrastructure, we have them secure what's called performance bonds. And so this has resulted in a lawsuit for those performance bonds that were supposed to guarantee the work that the work would happen. So the city is currently fighting with the surety company that issued those bonds for them to either pay for the improvements or build them. And again, these issues are discussed in detail in those episodes that I mentioned. But having said that, we do recognize the need for a connection on the west side of the freeway, and we may not be able to wait for the resolution of that particular lawsuit. So, Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but are there ways we can connect New Roberts Road to the existing alignment of Old Roberts Road so that it can connect up to Singleton? And what are some of the challenges that could come with that?
So, but I'll start by saying the bankruptcy occurred at probably the worst possible time. And I guess there is no good time for a bankruptcy anyway, but this would be a worst possible time. The reason I say that is the El Casco Creek that crosses Roberts Road was under construction when the bankruptcy occurred. It was not completed. I don't know, well, can you hover over anything? But it's where on the screen where it shows Roberts Road is, that it was just partially built. And in order to be able to finish the roadway, we are looking at, could it be built with a partially built culvert? The answer, I think, is going to be no, but perhaps it does not be completed, but some more improvements will be needed in order to be able to finish the roadway so that we can then allow the traffic to traverse over the culvert. The second big challenge for us is related to how do we get back to existing Roberts Road? As you can see on the screen, the intent of Roberts Road is to traverse to the left, as shown on the screen, and not tie into existing Roberts Road. When the roadway was constructed, it was raised to go over the El Casco Creek. So we have a grading challenge to get Old Roberts Road tied back into, or New Roberts Road tied back into Old Roberts Road. And if we wait until the grades match again, we will have challenges with right-of-way. It is private property. It would have to be acquired in order to connect the two roadways together. In closing, I would say we are working on developing solutions to be able to tie New Roberts Road into Old Roberts Road. We would plan to build that as part of the new ramp construction so that there will be an opportunity to utilize the west side of the freeway to get to Singleton, the new Singleton interchange. Our objective here is to have the Singleton ramps done prior to beginning construction of the Cherry Valley interchange so that an alternate route will be available.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay. So let's switch back now to the interchange. So Brandon, let's talk about that construction. A lot of residents have expressed concerns over further delays as a result of construction. So when we think about construction in the conventional sense, it usually, restricts movements, makes roads even narrower. And Mike and I just discussed it, the adjacent interchange and how that will be part of the solution to that problem. But walk us through what is involved in construction and how it will be staged and phased to minimize impacts. And also the flip side of that, how staging in this way impacts the timeline of the project and perhaps the cost.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so when building an interchange that's at an active interchange, which is most of the time, just like this scenario, we have a couple goals. We want to do it as quickly as possible, but also as safely as possible, while trying to limit the traffic impacts to both the drivers on the freeway and definitely the local community in like Calimesa in this case. So when we go to build an interchange, our job as designers right now as engineers to try to develop a plan that's workable for the contractor. And so Caltrans is part of that discussion. The city is part of that discussion. And obviously we designers are part of that discussion. And the goal is to try to keep the operations of the facility intact. And what I mean by that is if you're going eastbound on Cherry Valley and you want to get across the freeway or westbound, or you want to get onto the freeway or off of the freeway, we want to keep all those movements open as much as possible all the time. And so we have to come up with a strategy to build this thing around the drivers. Now, there's a world where you shut down an entire interchange and you do it quicker, but everyone has to go different ways to get to the freeway, and from the freeway, get to home in different ways. While that can be a quicker solution, it is a much, much larger, impactful solution to the folks that need to use this facility. So in this case, we are doing the more traditional working around the interchange while it's open. So what happens is we've come up with, but it's still in review with Caltrans because these are definitely complex, is ways to maneuver traffic to the interchange during construction. In this particular project, we think construction will take around 2 years. Now, we have not totally dialed that in because that is contractor driven as well. We try to come up with a plan and a concept to the contractor, say, contractor, here's what we think this thing will do. You place your bids and you tell us how you're going to build it, try to fit within our box that we've told you. So more to come on that, of course, as we get the money and we get this thing into construction. But so we work with Caltrans in the city to ensure those movements stay open. Now, you look at this interchange and it's right on top of the existing one. So you have to say, well, how is that possible? And the way that's possible is you stage it in ways, build certain pieces over here while these areas are open. When the new pieces are built, put people on the new pieces and then build the other pieces. The two bridges in gray are a really great example. We don't have enough time to go over everything, but a great example so I can help tell that story. So one of those bridges is on top of the existing bridge. I believe it's the bridge in the top of our view here. And I won't use directions with these bridges. It get very confusing. So what's going to happen is we're going to build one of the new bridges next to the bridge that's open, keep the traffic flowing on that existing bridge, build the new bridge, build the pavement near it, and then shift everyone to the new bridge and take down the old bridge and build the second bridge. The reason there's two bridges, a diverging diamond, makes up for this scenario. Simply speaking, this could be one big bridge, and we would just do it in what we call left and right, 1 and 2 stage. In this case, there just happens to be two bridges that we're not going to ever connect to each other. So anyway, that's a great example of keeping people moving through it. Now, to say there will never, ever be a closure is not true. It's not possible on any project because, for instance, you have to erect false work, per se, to get over the freeway. So in that case, you can't erect false work over people driving. That's not safe. Some cases, you might have to switch over an intersection. So that would happen on a weekend night overnight when most of us are sleeping, but people definitely still use the interchange at night. And so in these nighttime late hours, you would see signs that would say, hey, in this particular case, you're going to take Singleton Road, or Roberts Road, if it's a connection to Singleton, for the evening while we go and make this switch at the intersection. And then you wake up in the morning and it's all good. There are weekend closures for what's called a 55-hour closure that's possible as well. So 10-day, 55-hour weekend closures are what we're going to see here, but definitely not a peak busy traffic period. We're going to lose movements, that's for sure. And that's the goal, at least. So hopefully that answers it. And I could go on forever as an engineer, but I won't.
I think one other question was about emergency service access in particular. So can you maybe touch upon that briefly?
Yeah, emergency access is paramount. And so emergency access will always be available on a project like this. Of course, when we talk about a scenario where we, let's say, are working over the freeway and have to literally close the bridge, there will be alternate routes for emergency services in those rare cases. But for the predominance of this, I'll say 2-year period, again, plus or minus, emergency access will always be available, even if contractor has cones and K-rail in the way. The contracting and our community understands that emergencies happen, and the contractor will literally move things out of the way if that's absolutely needed. Let's say the cars are waiting at the signal and things are backed up and we need to get a fire engine or an ambulance or a police officer through. That stuff is all possible. Definitely not a great concern. And of course, if you need to get to the hospital yourself in your vehicle, that's where you go back to what I talked about, is trying to nearly eliminate any changes to movements for people, other than those rare cases where we will have alternate routes.
Right.
So it should be handled, if you will.
Okay, perfect. And I think that's also just underscores the importance of the Singleton Road interchange and having that a fully functioning interchange and having that connection to Roberts, that Roberts Road connection and all that. So I think that all ties back into that as well. Okay. So as we kind of alluded to earlier, one of the things that, we're talking about construction here, but we really the project can't proceed until it's fully funded. We talked about that large gap that we have. So given that, I want to first take a moment to talk about a question we hear a lot, which is, why didn't the developers just build the interchange first? Why are we dealing with all of this traffic now? And I completely understand why people feel that way. Anyone who uses this interchange knows it's been over capacity for a long time. And honestly, these improvements are coming years after they were first needed. And so, and we started working on this, I think Mike may have mentioned it, 3 years before a single home in Calimesa, as far as new development, was built. So it's not like we didn't start, until after those impacts were already there. A lot of the impacts have come from Beaumont, Tournament Hills, Fairway Canyon, and those areas. So the challenge is that an interchange isn't something a developer can realistically build on their own. These are huge regional scale projects that cost tens of millions of dollars, take years to plan and develop, as we learned earlier, and no single development generates enough revenue or traffic to make that kind of upfront investment possible. And that's partially why the TUMF program exists, because it collects from all developments for regional transportation improvements. So private builders simply can't take on that level of risk years before there's enough growth to support it. So instead, what happens across California, not just here, is that development contributes its fair share over time, and the city has to pull together multiple funding sources to make a major project like this feasible. And that's exactly where we are now. The growth has occurred, the need is undeniable, and we're finally in a position to pursue the kind of state and federal grants that can help close a very large funding gap. The project also needs to be shovel ready, and it will be in that position by the time decisions are made on what projects get funded by these programs. Now, we talked a little bit about why an interchange like this doesn't get built the moment development starts happening. I want to walk you through what we are doing to get this project funded, because a project of this size, about around $70 million, can't be paid for by any single source. It requires a combination of federal, state, and regional dollars, and those dollars are incredibly competitive. So we're pursuing 3 major grant programs. The first is the BUILD program, which some of you may remember was called Reyes under the Biden administration. The maximum request we can submit is $25 million in this program. To give you a sense of how competitive this is, in the most recent round, there were about $13 billion with a B in requests nationwide. Only about $1.8 billion was actually awarded, spread across 148 projects nationwide, and only 4 of those were in California. So the demand is enormous and far exceeds the available funding. The second program is Infra, another federal program focused on major transportation needs. The minimum request is $25 million, so that's the minimum for this program. In the last cycle, Infra received $27 billion in requests from roughly 200 projects, and only $2.58 billion was awarded to 36 projects nationwide. Again, far more need than funding. The third is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, or TCEP, which is a state program funded through gas tax revenue. In the last round, 43 applications were submitted requesting $1.3 billion in funds, and 26 projects were awarded for just under $1 billion. Locally, Beaumont has done extremely well with this program, receiving about $33 million for the Potrero interchange on State Route 60 and $50 million for the Pennsylvania Avenue Railroad grade separation. Now, the good news is that Calimesa has hired the same consulting firm that wrote Beaumont's 2 successful TCEP applications. They've also written successful build, raise, and infra applications for agencies across the country. So we have a strong team guiding us there. But grant writing alone isn't enough. These funding decisions are influenced by advocacy, by demonstrating regional benefit, and by showing that this project addresses real existing impacts, not just future growth. And that's where this project actually has an advantage. The congestion you experience every day is exactly the type of documented impact that these programs prioritize. Now, I recognize that's not ideal, and proactive construction of infrastructure would always be the preferred way to do things, but you've probably heard of vast infrastructure deficits nationwide, which is why this situation occurs. Earlier this year, Mike and I, along with the mayor, traveled to Washington, D.C. to advocate directly for this project. Congressman Ken Calvert, who represents our city, has pledged his support, and in early 2026, we'll be making another trip to meet with the U.S. Department of Transportation and our congressional delegation to reinforce the regional importance of this interchange. We'll also be heading to Sacramento to meet with Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission to strengthen our position for TCEP funding. So the goal is to secure a combination of state and federal funding that can be used as a match against each other, which then frees up local regional transportation dollars for other critical projects in Calimesa. So in other words, every dollar we can pull from outside sources multiplies the impacts of the dollars we have here at home. And finally, public support is a big part of the scoring criteria for every one of these grants. So you'll see us posting opportunities on our website and our social media channels for residents to submit letters of support. When hundreds of residents speak with one voice, it really makes a difference. So I know this is a lot to absorb. So I just want to say Calimesa is actively pursuing grant funding as Brandon and his team finishes up all the construction drawings. The notice of funding opportunity for the build program is out now, so we'll be asking for letters of support soon. If you'd like to get in on that now, please feel free to send a letter to me at my email address, which is wkolbow, WKOLBOW, at calimesa.gov, or just send it to my attention at City Hall, 908 Park Avenue, Calimesa, California, 92320. Please make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast, as this is where updates will be given most frequently, including when we reach milestones or if we get word on any funding decisions for these programs. The information is out there, and that's where to get it. Again, go to calimesa.gov/podcast to subscribe. So when we move to construction, we'll also use the city's website and social media channels to push out advance notice of major lane and freeway closures and detours. So please make sure you're following those for real-time updates. So turning to our Q&A, I think we've answered most of the questions that were received when people registered for this event. But there are a few items I'd like to clarify in some broad categories of questions that were asked. Some development questions were asked, and although that's not the focus of this town hall, I do want to briefly touch upon them. First, the warehouses that were supposed to go up in town center are likely several years from being constructed, if they are constructed, due to all the layers of legal problems happening between all the private landowners of that area. So nothing will probably happen with that development in any way, shape, or form until all of that is resolved. Again, this was covered in several episodes of the podcast that will be linked on the recorded version of this town hall, which will be available tomorrow. The Summerwind Commons Shopping Center, where the Dutch Brothers is located, has had a lot of challenges, as you can probably have seen. The latest being that their general contractor went bankrupt and left a lot of the subcontractors unpaid, despite the Commons developer paying the general contractor for those services. A major piece of infrastructure is a lift station that is needed to serve that development. So, as the previous contractor left that unfinished, so their new contractor, which they recently engaged, needs to order the parts needed to finish it. So these parts have a relatively long lead time. So until that happens, the Dutch Brothers and other future businesses can't open because they won't have sewer service. And one question we received was, is there a limit on how many of the same businesses that can be built? The short answer is no if you're asking about specific brands. Zoning regulates land uses, but the city cannot pick and choose specific brands or limit competition. If you've had that or similar types of questions, I highly recommend that you listen to episode 59 of the podcast, and that's entitled Beyond the Wish List, the real story of how cities attract retail. I talked about these types of things and more, along with addressing many misconceptions about what cities can and can't do with regard to businesses and development, and how development has shifted in direct reaction to consumer behavior. Now, as far as transportation-related questions, we had two that we might have not addressed this far. The first is regarding I-10 being widened through Calimesa. And, options that they had talked about included truck lanes or express lanes. These days, regional agencies take the lead on these types of projects. So the Riverside County Transportation Commission, or RCTC, is the regional agency in our case. RCTC does have an I-10 truck climbing lane project listed on their website, although it's in the long range category. So here's what the project page says. RCTC, in partnership with Caltrans, proposes to add an eastbound truck climbing lane from I-10, the San Bernardino County line along I-10, to the State Route 60 interchange. The project is in the expenditure plan for Measure A, the voter-approved half-cent sales tax measure for transportation improvements in Riverside County. Measure A will fund a portion of the project. However, the expenditure plan assumes 50% of all project expenses would be paid for with federal and state transportation funding sources. These sources are currently funded far below historical levels. Therefore, until additional funding is available, RCTC cannot proceed with environmental reviews, design, right-of-way acquisition, or construction for this project. And currently, there are no plans to add express lanes on this stretch of I-10, but there has been some talk about adding express lanes on I-10 from the State Route 60 interchange to State Route 111 near Palm Springs, although that would be many, many years away. Lastly, I will pose this as this last set of questions to Mike. A few questions came in about if there will be temporary traffic relief before construction starts. Can you address that particular aspect and what some of the challenges and limitations we have as a city in that regard?
Yes. The existing traffic signals that are located at the Cherry Valley Interchange are operated and maintained by Caltrans. We do not have the authority to go in and change signal timing, for example. So typically when there is challenges with timing, we would go in and adjust the timing to allow greater amounts of time to allow the queues that are greater to get through an intersection.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we do not have the authority to do that. What we have done, because we have observed this situation where there's a lot of backup on Cherry Valley, we have brought it to Caltrans' attention, and their response is they will observe it and adjust it as they see is required. So we don't really have any authority to change anything out there. We, like the public, can only reach out to Caltrans and say, hey, there's a problem. Can you please take a look at it and address it?
I'm going to add, this is not just a Calimesa doesn't have the authority thing. So we're clear. It's not like Will and Mike did something wrong to lose authority. This is the entire state. So cities do not get to, in California, get to operate Caltrans signals, which are at any signal at a ramp at an interchange is a Caltrans signal, generally speaking. So I just want to point that out. Sorry, Will.
Right. No, that's, I'm glad you added that, because I wanted to add also, there's sometimes, traffic signalization is normally a very useful and effective tool in traffic management. But because of those same situations, Caltrans also doesn't like to play with others in terms of that type of thing, right? So that's another challenge we would have. So even though we have those two signals prior to the interchange and then the two signals at the interchange, in an ideal world, we would want to synchronize those. But again, because of those same issues, we cannot do that.
I will add, Will, that in the project that we're working on with the overall interchange, we will be working with Caltrans to try to make the best ultimate signal operations for the facility. So we kind of have our hands in it in a good way with being able to work with them for the future interchange and trying to get the most out of it. But I'll just kind of caveat to say that for a Caltrans signal, they do not like their ramps to back up onto the freeway. That creates a freeway safety issue that Caltrans wants to avoid. So oftentimes you do see a priority in the eyes of Caltrans. I'm not defending or saying anything about that priority. I'm just pointing it out that they prioritize to make sure the ramps don't back up onto their freeway.
So I don't see any questions from our discussion here at this point. We do have a couple of more minutes before 7 o'clock, so we can leave it open. But I guess maybe I just want to ask one more question on that issue. And is that, I guess, in your experience, Brandon, because you do a lot of these type of projects all over the state, is your experience that Caltrans is there any indication that they may be softening on synchronization? Because I know, like I said, there's a lot of places in the state where major arterials have done miles and miles of synchronization, and sometimes those get to Caltrans facilities where they have Caltrans signals. Have you seen any type of shift in that at all?
Yeah, so on this project, we will be working to build the infrastructure for synchronization. And what'll happen is actually the city of Calimesa and Caltrans will enter into certain agreements. And as part of those agreements, I'm going to use the term negotiating. There will be negotiating that'll happen to try to achieve synchronization, for example, across their signals. So it is possible, Will. It definitely is something that we will work with Caltrans on to understand their appetite for synchronization. And while I think it's achievable, will that suddenly allow us to take control of the intersection and make the city priority at their ramps? No. Will it work with the other signals better as long as we are able to strike a negotiation with synchronization from signals? The answer is yes. So I'm optimistic that will improve as a result of the interchange with respect to synchronization. Will.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we were just about 7 o'clock. We've made it through the hour. I guess I'll take it as a good sign that we don't have questions because hopefully we answered what everyone was coming here to think. I think maybe some people are disappointed because I think that there's still a lot of work to do in order for us to get to that construction phase. So it's going to be a while still. It's not like construction is going to be starting tomorrow or anything, and we do have that funding. But in that vein, though, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank you so much to Mike and Brandon for taking part in this forum tonight. Again, I know this is a lot of information, so you may still have questions, or maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking them in this forum. So if you have any questions after this, and that maybe pop into your head afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me directly via email at wkolbow, WKOLBOW @calimesa.gov. and I will do my best to get your questions answered. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Subscribe to and follow the podcast to get the latest and most accurate information. All of our links are at calimesa.gov/podcast. And if you see misinformation there about things happening in your city and you are armed with information from this forum and the podcast, please direct folks to the podcast so that others can also get the correct information. Make sure to also follow the City of Calimesa on both Instagram and TikTok. Until next time, I hope that however you celebrate the holidays, that you have a great time with family and friends. And for me personally, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas. We will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.